there.
Matt, is anybody with you in the room?
Just Emily and I are in the room right now.
Okay.
Kate Lamar will be joining virtually, but probably a few minutes late, coming straight from dog puppy training. And I see Chapin at home, which is probably the person I expected most likely, if anybody, to show up here. So we may be just remote.
Okay.
I see
Have we
Ron.
heard from Shayla
I have
or
not heard from Shayla. Alex had somebody come pick up a form-based code draft this afternoon, so I take that he expects to be here. We'll see.
Okay. All right. Well, we have 4 planning commission members on the line right now, so let's see, we open the meeting. Sorry, I have so many screens open. I just need to find our agenda. Let's see. So we're called to order and we'll do minutes first, or shall we wait on those, do you think, Matt?
You might want to wait and just jump right into the agenda. I do have to go at about 7:45 to the select board.
Okay, great.
Not critical, but I'd recommend jumping right in.
Okay.
Alex joining in from the waiting room.
Okay, great. All right. Hi, Alex. Just to get you up to speed, we are going to postpone the minutes for the moment and dive right into public comment. So, Mr. Nick, I understand you have something you'd like to say.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, super. Thanks for having me. I know you've got a busy meeting tonight, so I'll try to be brief. We've been working, as you know, with the Robert family and the Greer family with their lots located across from the O'Brien store and along Williston Road. And, you know, the Robert family is in a unique situation. They've got industrial land. And at some point 5 years ago, I guess, their 1 acre lot was rezoned for Gateway West. And I've had experience with 2 other properties that we've sold on the other 2 corners of that intersection, and they continue to be the same uses as they were. So nobody's taken the opportunity to redevelop based on the current zoning, which is very limiting, the types of uses that are allowed. And in marketing the Robert property and the Greer property, we've shown it to a number of folks who looked at it for housing, which is one of the allowed uses. And when they understand that it's in the flight path and the F-35s are flying now, that residential use really just doesn't work there. I'd be shocked if somebody ended up doing that there. We've got a lot of interest in industrial type uses, but they're not allowed. And the Robert Lot 1 is a unique situation, as I mentioned in an earlier meeting with you, that it doesn't have its own curb cut. And so it's forced to enter through Lot 2, which is an industrial use. And then it would transition into the Gateway West zone, which, you know, is kind of very counterintuitive that you'd force one lot to be serviced through a different zone. So that doesn't work for a lot of folks either. We've since had interest from U-Haul with their Lot 3 development. They are now have Lot 2 under contract, and they would like to consider Lot 1 and even the Greer lot if they could do mini storage on those properties. They're also looking at a regional office, and that would likely go on the Greer lot if they decided to do a regional office. Now, that type of use, I believe, is allowed in the Gateway West, a straight office use. Emily may correct me, but I believe U-Haul could do a straight office there. But to allow mini storage in conjunction with that, I think would really work well for everybody. And even I think the neighbors to the south, it's, not much noise coming from mini storage. You can landscape it. I think it would work well. Even another reason to consider this, I did a little, the mini storage is a nice use. It's quiet, not a lot of traffic going in and out. But in Williston, you have over, I just did a count, over 25 acres of good industrial land has been devoted or developed as mini storage. And when you look around Chittenden County, you realize that there's very little prime industrial land left, which really hinders the market. It hinders job growth. And so you say to yourself, well, is that the highest and best use for those other lots in Williston when you're limiting businesses to grow? But mini storage is a great use and there's a need for it. So I look at this opportunity, I say, well, maybe, even the Gateway West, if you allowed mini storage in the entire Gateway West district, potentially over time, you could have mini storage with great landscaping on the frontage. And I know that reading through the notes that the neighbors are all concerned about, or the neighbors beyond those lots, the housing lots, they've got noise to deal with on Williston Road, which is only going to get greater. Perhaps this might be a use that makes sense where limited noise, great landscaping, you could actually minimize the noise to the neighborhoods with this type of use. Just an idea. I'm really here to talk about the Robert land and the Greer corner, and in hopes that you would consider this change. And looking at the use table, it says rental and leasing services, but not including outdoor sales and storage. So it looks like with just a slight change in, you take out the but now, you'd say including outdoor storage, you could actually take two words out and it would work. Emily may be frowning right now. Maybe that's not the way she wants to do this, but that would be an easy solution. So I'm happy to talk about. I mean, there are, if U-Haul doesn't advance their idea about a regional office, that would leave it may be that you'd want to consider other uses in this zone. I mean, it is quite limiting, and we've gotten calls for electrical contractors and small shops with retail space in front, and so a small flex type of use I think would also be acceptable in this zone as well. So anyway, those are my thoughts, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Emily, could I ask you to review the technical side of things in terms of the different zoning districts?
Yeah. So let me pull up. If you can see, oh man, it's going to do this wacky thing. So can you guys see this area map?
Yes.
So this shows Williston Road and South Brunel Road. The Greer lot and lot 1 are in the Gateway West. Lot 2 mostly is an industrial, and lot 3, where U-Haul is also an industrial. The memo provided includes the list of allowed uses in Gateway, primarily limited to finance and insurance, real estate, office. professional and technical services, admin support, healthcare, and a few other very specific uses. What Nick described, the regional offices for U-Haul, that type of use, I believe would be allowed in Gateway West, mostly under that admin and support services category. What other questions do you have, Megan? Did that answer it?
Yeah, no, that was fine. I just wanted to give you a chance to review the document side of things and the technical details. Planning Commissioner questions. Chapin, did you have one?
I do, and I think this is for Jeff Nick. There is a drawing or a map in the materials that shows a sketch of where the mini storage might be. And between it and Williston Road is pink. And I didn't know what the pink represented.
I think that was a sketch that was provided by staff, if I'm not mistaken. Emily, that sketch that.
So one of the things I did in your packet, Jeff, Nick, and I had conversations about these lots and the potential for a specific plan where lots 1, 2, and Greer would be developed together. And as you're all familiar with specific plan process, it's an opportunity to write your own zoning in terms of allowed uses. Because allowing mini storage in Gateway West would allow it along that entire frontage along Williston Road. The houses across from New England Chimney Supply, where there was a lot of discussion, and that segment of road where we were talking about that sidewalk. So that whole Gateway District mini storage would be allowed. Whereas the specific plan process would just change the uses for the lots under consideration.
So back to my question, the pink there, is that remaining forested?
The pink would be buildings. So green I've shown as a park or landscape buffer, a parking island in the median. The pink is, I was showing buildings.
I see.
Building line full to the street. It could be the regional offices, other office uses, mini storage in a building that isn't like the single rows of mini storage. That long skinny in the rear, that I was thinking would be the more traditional mini storage where it's a single story building with the roll up garage doors. There was a lot of discussion at the development review phase for U-Haul about how visible would those mini storage units be from Williston Road. I know primarily the U-Haul building, they're within that large central building, but there are some ranks of roll-up doors, and the DRB was concerned with how are they oriented, how are they screened, how much will be visible from Williston Road.
Yeah, I did not put, obviously that's Emily's plan. That wouldn't work for what I'm thinking about here. There would need to be more mini storage. The corner lot would be an office if U-Haul proceeded with their plans. They're very interested in mini storage. They already have lot 2 under agreement. They would continue the mini storage use on lot 1 and likely place an office building on the corner lot in conjunction with additional mini storage. So I think they haven't told me exactly their size, but something in the range of 3,000 square feet of building, maybe 4,000 on that corner lot. It's only 0.7 acres with some mini storage. That would be the idea. So the office would conform with your current zoning. The mini storage is the change. Although mini storage is allowed on lot 2, we're really talking about 1.5 acres of mini storage right there.
Thank you both. What I was getting at is the view as you drive on or travel on Route 2, what it is that you would see that's close to the road, and the intent of the gateway to be sort of a gentle transition from industrial to mixed use before you get into the Taft Corners zoning. And so I was just trying to imagine what it would look like along there. And certainly an office building on the corner would be well within expectations. Thank you.
Other questions from planning commissioners? Go ahead, Alex.
It's not so much a question as a comment, but just, it seems like if we were to, I'm just thinking out loud, reacting to this thing, we were to reconsider sort of the uses for the whole gateway section, we might end up effectively reversing the decision we just made on the NACS plan if we take it sort of too far, right? Whereas this plan that was proposed here by Emily, like as a concept, and what Jeff has described just now, takes the development all the way to the corner, the same one in which we were, interested in the public benefit on of crosswalks and sidewalks and all of that. So this, to me, it just seems like this is much more suited to a specific plan than it is to sort of a rezoning. And it's not that I'm not willing to consider the rezoning. It would probably be sort of super narrow, but it just seems much more oriented to what the specific plan was meant for.
And when you say specific plan, I think Emily and I had this discussion where we were talking about a bus bump out with probably a structure maybe, and then a crosswalk. Maybe
yeah, well, the specific plan is, and Emily, maybe you can expound on the process, but the whole idea is that you guys would submit a plan and say, here's what we want to build. Here's what we think the public benefit of building it would be. It doesn't have to be a bus stop, doesn't have to be a crosswalk, right? You could propose, taking the corner lot and turning it into a park. So we could take all of zone 2 and turn it into a strip mall. I don't know, right? It's sort of, there are defined public benefits under the specific plan process, and it allows us to make sort of specific exemptions. Emily, did I represent that correctly? Or maybe you could explain it a little more technically accurate?
Yeah, I think you did a pretty good job there. It's about providing that substantial benefit. It could be infrastructure, it could be a park, or a number of other things based on those criteria in Chapter 9. I do want to be
sorry, go ahead.
So I know the next question the Planning Commission is probably going to have is, what are your next steps with this? For tonight, no decision needs to be made. Jeff Nick's introducing the idea. I did provide some materials to consider. A similar question was posed last year, where the industrial zoning district boundary would be changed as it relates to Lot 1 in Greer. So there's some material for the Planning Commission to consider. If at a future meeting you decided that this is something that you want to consider further, staff can provide more information. And it would most likely result, if you wanted to do a bylaw amendment, whether it's to change the zoning district boundary or change allowed uses, a work plan item that would happen after form-based code sometime in the spring of 2022 at the earliest.
Okay, thanks for that summary. Emily,
Okay.
Go ahead, Chapin.
I was just going to just sort of share an observation, which is coming out of the NECS specific plan process. I think all of us, or most of us, felt like it's really valuable if the public benefit is in the area and benefits the people most impacted by the change. And so obviously a park or some or all of that corner lot would be a wonderful addition to the community around it. Another thing that would be very valuable in my view is to have a multimodal path running along the back of that property that could connect through to Shunpike somehow, because right now, if you're biking down Williston Road, where we have pretty good side lanes, and you want to go onto Shunpike, the turn onto Brownell and then get into Shunpike, it's not friendly. So in terms of a benefit there, that's a thought. And then finally, I just want to be careful. The Robert lot was subdivided, and I don't want to, by putting things back together for U-Haul's purpose, back into doing a project that would have had to go through Act 250 if it had not been subdivided. So the idea of recombining lots that were divided before concerns me, but if the result is, and I don't know that it is in this case, I just want to say I want to be careful not to be facilitating skirting of Act 250.
No, actually, we've done, if they did this whole project, they would go under Act 250 because it would bring them over the 10 acres. So we are mindful of that. We're not
okay.
trying to skirt Act 250.
So, okay, and so I just want to say I want to be mindful of that. It's not that we shouldn't do it, but I want to be mindful of how that comes out.
Yeah, no, we already are. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, any other
Okay.
planning commission comments or questions?
I just want to say that this is actually an interesting thing to be looking at, and I hope we continue the discussion.
Yeah,
Thanks.
agreed.
Great. Well, thank you for your time. I don't want to wait. We've taken anybody more time, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. All right, so the main event, form-based code. I hope everyone was able to pick up a binder, but I'm going to guess that Jeff, being a well-prepared guy, has some visuals for us.
Okay, you're not going to start with a quiz, Megan? Aren't we
Oh,
starting with a
well.
quiz?
I've got one right after.
Oh, there you go. So I am not quite sure what is in store for us tonight, but I'm happy to, at this point, pretty much turn it over to Jeff and Matt and Emily. I don't know, is Matt gone? Oh no, there's Matt. I don't know if you had any introductory or guidelines that you'd like to start us off with. Otherwise, we'll just dive in with Jeff.
Sure. Just a really brief thank you to Williston staff, Melinda and Emily, Jeff and team, all of you who have been monitoring this project, who have been able to come out to Taft Corners with us over the last few months. There's a lot that has gone into this, and I'm really excited to have Jeff give an overview of the code, remembering that, the review of the individual components of this code is really going to be, it's a project on every planning commission agenda from now through the end of the calendar year at least. So there is some time to go over this deliberatively and carefully. And it's been really rewarding to work on this with Jeff and the RPC staff and my staff here, getting it as far as we have thus far. So thank you, and take it away, Jeff. And like I said, if I stand up and leave, it's not because I dislike this, it's because I have to go to the select board.
All right. I want to, one thing Matt said, one word, overview. I want to stress that and try and honor it. You may have noticed I like to talk too much. Okay, I'm going to flip. See what happens when I go to the slideshow. Okay, I hope you're seeing tonight. I'm going to start the first half of this. I think the best way to understand how the form-based code works and how it's put together is not to start and go through page 1 or chapter 1 through chapter 8, but to look at it from the point of view of imagining that you are an end user, a citizen, which you are, possibly a property owner, and you want to know what you could do with your property. Or another way is, I'll point this out, say you live in Taft Corners and you want to know what the property across the street or down the street can do. So I'm just going to jump in and try and make this quick. All right. And we use the clever, we think, thing, 3 easy pieces. This is if you're a citizen: regulating plan, building form standards, and architectural standards. Starting with the regulating plan, which is the first place you go, and I'll show you an aerial to show you the relationship. This is the site if you're up in a helicopter. The regulating plan, I think that's described in the text as, you might think of it as a souped up zoning code. Well, the regulating plan is highly place specific. You can see here how it's really laid down on the land. It's very tied to the land. Not zoning maps tend to be kind of abstract and amorphous. This is how it fits. And this is what it looks like when we get that. Thank you. We get the photograph out. The coding is in the public realm because what you have to do with your property is based on primarily about how it performs to the street, to the public. But here's that plan. We're going to jump into it. A lot of colors, a lot of lines. We're going to zoom in one more time. And we're going to take a look, not quite at random. It's this piece of Taft Corners. Now, next slide, I've made it a little bit more orthogonal. And you might imagine that you live, I'll say, I don't know if, can you see my arrow? Might imagine you live in the second or third story and you have the coolest apartment in Vermont, looking
the edge
out
of the
over-
bed and bath parking. Sorry, Jeff. I was just laughing at that. It's the edge of the bed and bath parking, but it's
Yes,
perfect.
no, that's good. A good locator and a good idea of how much it can transform. But imagine you're sitting here in the world's greatest apartment with a long view down Harvest Square or Green or whatever you choose to call it, and you want to know what this lot across the way can do. Now notice there's an alley here, or the suggestion of an alley, which isn't means it has to be exactly there, but a lot of lines on the form-based code. The two most important ones. The first is that required building line. That means that basically start your building here, place the facade of your building on that line. So if you walk across the street, you're going to put your hand on the building within a couple of feet for most of that distance. The second is a parking setback line. Now, the form-based code doesn't tell the designer or the developer what to do with their parking behind that line. Just don't come any closer to the street. And that's typically set back 30 feet, designed to encourage people to have built, usable or habitable building in between those two so they don't waste the space. But if it's a high demand, the parking in the middle of the block, it could be in a parking structure, it could be underground, it could be all surface, but the code says 30-foot setback. So you have a build to, which is start here, and a setback, which is don't get any closer than that distance. The other thing, probably the overwhelming thing, besides now the green, civic green, that's a designation that's on the code. The trees and the real regulating plan won't be there. I wanted to show those to help it be easier to visualize what this green might be like and help a little bit with the scale. But the colors on this plan, there's this, I'll call it, cantaloupe, kind of a yellow gold color. Gold might sound better. Gold and orange. Those tell you what the rules for the building, what you can build on that site. Now in the upper left, there's a key on the regulating plan, and we're going to look specifically at that gold color, which tells you look in the building form standards for urban general 2. So the second piece, the building form standards, form and function in 3 dimensions. This first page of the building form standards and the 4 kind of levels of intensity or varieties of intensity. The one we're talking about first is the urban general 2 frontage. Here's the first page. There's some pictures that aren't there. We're working on those, trying to get the best pictures, including some with snow. We've heard about that. And then, a quick point. The first page here, the simple statement of intent, the photographs are meant to give the user and the designer, and I don't know, is Jeff Nick still with us?
Yeah.
Good. And
I'm still
people
here.
and people like Jeff Nick, the idea of what the big idea is. They're not regulatory, but it's trying to get you in the ballpark. The second page is something a little more specific and much more abstract. These are showing some of the different configurations that are possible. Now, this is looking from the inside of the lot out, so you're looking at the back of the building. Again, this is designed to give designers and developers ideas of just what some of the different possibilities are for building form. But up to this point, these are kind of what I call playbook. We lay out our codes in a combination. There's playbook and rule book. So this is the playbook giving you an idea, but the next pages are about what the real, I would call it, what the law is. That's laid out in 4 pages that deal with the placement of the building, height, elements, things like balconies, windows and doors, front porches, and then uses. Here's one of those. We're going to go through them quickly. Placement. This is a combination of diagrams and text, simple text, and what I would call, in the best sense of the word, simple diagrams. The idea is to not give an attorney or an architect, and they're both in competition to see who can have the most creative interpretations of things, not to give them anything to debate about. It's intended to eliminate gray areas. Now, that's not 100% possible. We push it as far as we can. Now, this tells you in placement, you see there's a minimum percentage of the facade frontage that has to have a building on it. And in this case, it's written out as 70%. If you have 70% of frontage on the street, it has to have 70 feet. If you have 100 feet of frontage, it has to have 70 feet of building on it. Other things, there's the parking setback, a requirement for a minimum amount of private open area, side setback, a small side setback, and I'm trying not to go on about this, but based on the visits and the discussion, some of you stood with us in front of what I'll call the Finney Crossing land scraper, which was a very almost 300 feet, or perhaps it was 300 feet of building. We talked about what could be, in what ways it could be better. This 5-foot, very minimal setback for this type is a minimum assurance, among some other things, that when you have very long stretches of development, there is some breakdown. It's not like someone landed an aircraft carrier on one of your blocks. So, getting back on track. Building placement. This tells you things that you must do, like the build-to line, and then permissive things, setbacks. Gives you the parameters, what you may do and what you must do as far as placing the building on your lot. Second, height. It talks about some internal things, some external things. You'll see some pink or magenta text in here, and those are areas in the draft you have where we are specifically calling your attention to those for conversation. Some of them we know are topics where there are different opinions on, and some of them we want to make you aware of because they're choices. But here you see on the height, we're saying there's a minimum height. If someone wants to build on this lot in the Urban General 2 section under this code, they have to build at least 2 stories. And then there's also a maximum. And there's some, is that 3 stories or 4 stories? So next, elements. Generally, the most important elements are fenestration on the front of the building, blank walls, hill streets, hill walkability, damage real estate value. And there's something we introduced here based on discussions, and I should stop referring to the land scraper, but how to have buildings have a better feel and detail. As you see at the bottom of this 4A, this is something we really want to talk about a lot as we go. Is a requirement that for buildings, this is for buildings that are longer than 100 feet, at least a third of the units on the street have to have balconies. And these are extruded balconies. And we can talk more about the logic behind that. It has to do with shade and shadow and detail and depth. But I'm going to move on. And finally, the frontage uses. And I think what you'll see here is it's very loose. Form-based code deals in really broad categories. You will not, the conversations about use will be extremely different than you just had on the first item on your agenda, and I think a lot more rare. So the third piece is the architectural standards, and let me see if I can get that to hold. But I want to make a point. Up to this point, you know, when you walk across the street to that lot, where the building will be, you know, it's going to start, you can put your hands on it at that required building line. You know that it has to cover a minimum frontage. So, you know, you have ideas about it, how broad that building has to be, you know, a minimum height and a maximum height. And then you know that the window has to have, the building has to have windows and doors, no blank walls, entries on the street. So there's a certain analogy here to if you've ever been in a department store and seen a mannequin in the back that hasn't been dressed, that's kind of what you've got at this point. It's kind of like that unclothed mannequin. The form is there, but it's sort of, the character is not. The architectural standards are a little bit like clothing. It's a little bit of a simplistic analogy, and I can say it's like having a bow tie or no tie or things like that. But we call it the dress code, but it's much more than that. Some of these things are very functional, and this takes up some room. Generally, again, there's that left-hand page playbook, the intent images to give you an idea what we're talking about. The right-hand rule book. By the way, you'll see in these pages, you're going to see a lot of pink because there's a lot of choices and things to be made. I think this is where a lot of the Vermont character can be enforced or not here. So I think it's very important. But a lot of categories, I'm going to flip through them quickly, not now, but in a minute. And an idea about the architectural standards of the dress code. I'm going to show you a little photo imaging. This is not Taft Corners, or maybe 2050 when you have light rail, or 2060, I don't know. But there's an idea that the architectural standards cover kind of character of a building, but the building form standards set up the functioning of the building. If we're in a private, in a gated community, and I've worked in a few of those, we could really describe kind of exactly what these buildings look like, and you know, if it looks like this or it looks like this. And we could also tell you when you can hang your white laundry in the backyard or not, things like that. Can't do that as a city, and I think that's a good thing. But the architectural code, the architectural standards get into the character. What are the materials that make sense in Vermont? What are the proportions? What are the characteristics of Vermont buildings that are a little bit different? Okay, that's the end of the walkthrough of the three easy pieces. Now, if you're, I'd say, on the Planning Commission or town staff, there are more pieces than that, and here they are. These are the 8 sections of the code. I believe you have only have the first 7 in your binder. The administration is still being worked out, and I'm going to run through these as quickly as possible. I'm about 15 minutes right now. Introduction and definitions, a how-to section, regulating plan. This is something that I think most people who own a lot of land and really have to deal with super large scale developments, like Jeff Nick will be looking at this. I think for single lot owners and in the future, if lots get subdivided, not so much. But the building form standards, this is, for me, a big part of it. What you can build in 3 dimensions, form and function, the architectural standards, the public realm standards, what happens in the public part of the pedestrian part of the street and the automobile part of the street, very critical, and I think something that's usually missing from most places. You can have the world's most gorgeous building, gorgeous, whatever, Vermont granite architecture, but if it's on a horrible street, you're not going to have a good result. A little bit, I'm sorry, the two-way issue that you've got right now. Building functions use. Here we're being quite simple, dealing with broad categories. Administration, that's the process. All right, the first chapter, so, and I won't read all these things to you. I think you can probably read as fast as I can talk. Yes, regulating plan. There is a guide of how to understand the code, a little bit of an explanation. Building form, standards themselves, building form and function, and here are the kind of flavors, to use a word, of that. And there's some kind of a step, sometimes subtle, sometimes significant in intensity in those. Architectural standards, which they're involved, building walls, roof eaves and parapets, windows and doors, awnings and canopies, street walls and fences, entry features, front porches, etc., lighting, mechanical, and signage. I will tell you that the standards here, there are a couple of added sections that we hadn't used much in the past. This draft of the code has a little bit of an extra step up in care about those details, about the front entry canopies, entry features, etc. Form-based code, the public realm standards, the pedestrian realm, getting that right, wide sidewalks, good door yards, Chapin, and planting the trees so that they grow, really giving them the right amount of soil so they just improve every year. And taming the automobile, not excluding it, but taming it. Cars driving slowly are fine. Enabling bicyclists. And I apologize, that's a lot fuzzier than it should be. The street sections are being developed, but this, I put this up to show the draft you have right now doesn't have these technical specifications in it. Those are being developed. It has some pretty good images of those streets, kind of low-level bird's eye. But the streets themselves, there's a lot of technical stuff in it. That's a technical word, stuff, that makes the Department of Public Works, et cetera, understand them as real. And parking and loading, it's really about smart parking, which involves a park once environment. Your car doesn't need 5 parking spaces in Taft's Corners. It needs 1 or 2. Talking about, and this is an important shift. The standards here stress something called shared parking. So the parking numbers may be not that different than you have now, your minimum requirements, but there's a big shift towards those requirements being for parking that is open and available to everyone, shared public parking. And there are limits on the amount of parking a business or a building can have that are reserved just for that business or that building. So the problem with most cities is, and we've worked in, and all my colleagues say this, so we're talking about working in several hundreds of cities across the United States, and towns and counties, and every single one of them will tell you they have a parking problem. And just the briefest of look tells you, actually, there's a lot of parking. They have a management problem. At peak hours, there's a lot of parking available, but it's reserved and kind of balkanized. So there are empty parking spaces that are not being used at peak times. Shared parking shifts that. So a lot of that parking is going to be available. So it's much, much more efficient than when every business, every building has its own parking and nobody else can use it. There's still reserved parking. If you are going to buy, if you're going to buy or rent an apartment or a condo in Taft's Corners, you'll still have a parking space or maybe two, depending on what you buy, but there'll also be shared parking in addition to that. And that's a critical point. So more shared, less reserved parking, and definitely really fully using on-street parking. Building functions, dealing with the uses, don't micromanage use, which I think we kind of do today. Broad use categories, and then always part of a code are common sense nuisance protections. And the way this chapter is laid out right now, we're making a reference to your existing nuisance protections. So while we're much looser about the uses, there's still those protections. So somebody can't put in a business that is making nuisance noise or releasing poisonous fumes, et cetera. And I have to stress this is a work in progress, but this is where we are right now with our use table, which is remarkably short and sweet. And that's a good thing. We might be able to get it a little shorter than this. So it offers much more flexibility, I would say, towards business and businesses changing and fitting to fit changes in the market. That's a little bit of a trade-off with more care about what the form of the building is, especially the building toward the street. And the approval process, and believe it or not, 23 minutes, and I'm done.
Okay. I suspect there are some questions. Is that the preferred next step, Matt?
I would think so. Matt,
Okay.
do you want to direct us?
I think some questions would be good. A couple of takeaways that I've wanted to kind of emphasize with the commission at this introductory meeting when you're thinking about this code. The first point has to do with the large scale map that Megan's trying to fold or unfold there. The regulating plan, and both thinking of it as a type of zoning map that talks about what buildings will look like on certain streets, but also looking at that it envisions Taft Corners, as the vision document did, as a place with walkable street blocks. There are a lot of new streets on there completing the grid pattern that the town has been talking about for a very long time. And so the creation of walkable blocks via zoning is really a new concept for the way Williston would look at land use in Taft Corners. So a plan to create blocks is a very large takeaway for me. The other is when Jeff mentioned architectural standards, and that there's really a lot of room for the commission to spend time on those and think about what will bring that uniquely Vermont or Williston feel to Taft Corners as it evolves. I couldn't agree more. Those of you who were able to come out with me and Jeff and Emily and Melinda when Jeff was up here, we talked a lot about architecture, and we had a long conversation one afternoon about pitched roofs, for example, and whether to mandate them, require them, or what do we do when we have a flat roof so we can screen mechanical equipment. The view in Taft Corners today of things that you might like to avoid or would like to do better is really there. And there's a lot of room to adjust those things right down to the types of building materials that will be allowed. So I'd encourage folks to spend, quite a bit of time with that. And the final thing is just that these minimum occupancy of the street frontage, that you really need to use your frontage as a place to put a building, and that's very different from anything Williston does today. Today we talk about pull the building to the sidewalk, and if it's not a building, here's your setback. And as folks have probably experienced in town, that does lead to times when the experience from walking along the street is of being beside or in front of a parking area or something else like that, not a building.
Dumpster enclosure.
Yeah, or a dumpster enclosure. We noted a number of street fronting dumpster enclosures on a walk that we took with some fellow planners on Friday as part of the Northern New England Planning Conference. So some things that I have as takeaways. This is a fundamentally different kind of zoning in terms of dictating the creation of walkable blocks and really occupying those blocks with buildings that become part of the streetscape. And there's a lot to be done in terms of looking at what those buildings are going to be like so that they feel like Vermont and feel like Williston. And I'm going to leave it there. There's probably a conversation could go in a lot of directions from there.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for kicking that off. Taylor, do you have any comments that you wanted to add in before we dive in?
I want to maximize this time for planning commission comments.
Okay.
Questions.
That's great. Okay. Okay, folks, let's hear your questions. What are your thoughts and reactions? Recognizing again that we've only kind of scratched the surface here and are getting really the introductory view. And so I'd love to hear from you.
I'd like to say that I have a lot of questions and comments, but I'd like to not go first because I tend to talk too much.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll let Alex go first then, because I see his hand is obediently raised.
Obediently. I've never been described as that in my life.
It's just your hand.
Taylor will most certainly attest to. All right. One very simple question, which is, what kind of feedback at this stage is most helpful? This is a very detailed document. Like, do you want us like basically being like, no, I want this to be maximum 1 story, or like, hey, you have to like, what kind of feedback is most helpful right now?
That's a great question. And I want to also invite Taylor to follow up on this since Matt has left the room. But I would call your attention first to the pink text, but I have to say, in no way do I expect or do I want, Matt is still here. Do I want, the Planning Commission to be limited to that? I think, there's no way that's going to happen. I've spent too much time with you guys, and that's a good thing. Look for things, certainly the pink text or the magenta text, things that you think are out of bounds, things you don't understand. I would say if you think it should all be 1 story, that might be a good example of something that's way out there. We got to this place. There are certain maybe, I don't know, boundaries, but they're not real boundaries because you can choose to go outside of them. But there's a town plan.
I picked a hyperbolic example so we wouldn't rattle on the example.
I like those though.
But I think tonight, questions about how the code works, how it's laid out, would probably about as deep as we want to go, unless the PC disagrees.
That's a good point.
I think just kind of how it functions. In your review, maybe some of you have already started, but I think, as Jeff said, really focus on those magenta pieces. And I guess, and we're going to review the code, section by section. I think it's going to be difficult for us to not jump sections ahead, but we'll try to stay focused on our sections. Kind of in between the meetings, if there are questions about future sections that let's say we won't review until later November or early December. I think Matt and Williston staff, or even myself, or even Jeff, if needed, can be a resource, and we can talk one-on-one with PC members, either via phone or Zoom or email. But for tonight, let's try to stay pretty surface level how the code works.
Great, thanks, Taylor. Okay, so other questions? Otherwise, we'll go to Chapin. Okay, go ahead, Chapin.
Okay, and so I did pick this up at noon today and had just a couple hours with it. So The main thing I wanted to say is I can see how this is going to work. It's wonderful. So I think it's on a really good track to be concise and to make Taft Corners be a place by form-based code, and to make it also easier to develop if it's in conformance. I have a hard time limiting to the process, how it's going to work. And so what I thought I would do is just highlight, to me, there's one place I feel like, only one place that I feel like you missed the mark. And there's one place that I feel like I am really uneasy. And the place I'm really uneasy is with the, what do you call the plan, the map plan?
Regulating plan.
Regulating plan. And it's about the areas where we talked about slight differences. On the one hand, it's wonderful to see where alleys are sketched in as possibilities. It's wonderful to see the grid working. But then there's some areas that I don't agree with the regulating plan. So I'm gonna have to figure out how to deal with that. I wanted to make a comment on page 9 on in section 41, 4.1, where it talks about street trees. It's the third from the last or fourth from the last little paragraph. And Vermont has very specific shade tree law, and it was updated just a year ago. And a process for administering shade tree law is called shade tree rather than street tree, because it may not be on a street, but anything that's basically in a public right of way or affects a public right of way is a shade tree. And I just wanted to make a note that we want to be sure to be in sync with that. So it's just a note to make sure we're okay with that.
Even though it's section 5.4.
The definition on page 9.
We're referring to the definition on page 9, right?
All right, okay.
Yeah, I was way back on page 9, but the detail is here. You're right on page 65. My comment there is just to make sure we're in sync with Vermont law about that, and there may be some things about that could take advantage. Okay, on the regulating plan, I was having a little trouble understanding the key, and there's something called like level 2 or the last thing on the left called level 2 streets. And I didn't see that there were any on the whole map. Is that true?
It could be a printing issue. Now I put this up shared my screen, and this is one of those, I'm glad you asked that, especially if it didn't print right. Level 2 streets, that's a recognition of reality. Pragmatics. And I'll show you them.
Actually, I do see one now down near Depot Lane.
Yeah, here's a good example, I think, would be, we looked at this, we did kind of a close-up of when we were talking about how to use this code. We did a close-up of this lot, or
yes,
and actually, of course, there are a couple of, and I say this in the best sense of the word, kind of 800-pound gorillas in land ownership here. So some of these lot lines are lot lines, but the ownership is much larger. But this lot, Chapin, you immediately recognize as a parking lot for Bed Bath & Beyond.
Yep.
Bed Bath & Beyond, the building footprint, and the building footprints in the GIS data is generally not that precise. So, but the building, close enough. The front of the building, if you're going to subdivide this block, which otherwise is come 2050 or 2060, would just be too big. It would be too big for walkability, and also less efficiently or intensely developed. But the front of Bed Bath & Beyond sits in the street. You couldn't, if you moved the street over in front of the building, it wouldn't work. The tier 2 or level 2, sorry, the level 2 street means there's a line in the code saying if you're going to develop a lot, you have to build the street that in front of that lot has to be constructed. The
I get it.
levels, the level 2 street is an exception to that. So it would allow the other 3 sides, would free up the other 3 sides of this and the other sides of this
And
to be built
thank you.
without having
Thank you.
to build the
And I
street.
didn't,
You couldn't
I
build.
didn't, I wasn't able to read that cross-hatching, is that was that cross-hatching. Thank you.
No, it's, and yeah, I would, I'd be scared of you if you understood that to begin with. And it's, I'm already sort of,
You-
In awe
And
enough.
actually, on page 13, where the key is described,
yes,
the arrow for level 2 street points to something different from, oh, I know what, maybe it just didn't print the cross-hatching there. Okay,
I'll get,
that's
yes,
helpful. That's helpful.
that's errata.
And then in that gray box, understanding the regulating plan, the second paragraph, required building line, RBL, says this red dashed line, and I didn't see red anywhere on the dashed lines. Is there a red dashed line?
There's a red dash line. The red is on my face.
Okay.
It's now a black.
Okay, good. No sweat.
And this is, I'm being a good example. I've got my red pen. So I'm making changes to it. It's inevitable, no matter how many times we go over these things.
Yeah. And what I'm doing is I'm just skipping through the things that caught my attention and hoping that it is helpful or sparks other conversation.
Mhm.
On page, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say one thing. I think there's a conversation that to me is important, and I've heard it. We've talked. We're wrestling with it, but is the idea about having more green and more open space.
Yes.
And the first is that just of what's here. We show 2 kinds of open space, public open space on the plan. The light green stuff, we call it civic green. And the idea is that's public open space, that it's very, things can be in it, but generally it's kind of unprogrammed. You can go out and throw a Frisbee in it, eat lunch in it, Frisbee golf. I don't play Frisbee as much as it sounds like, but it's very flexible space. I mean, the truth is I live a block away from a green that's a little bit shorter and a little bit wider than Harvest Lane Green. And when I go out there at most any time of the day, and sometimes at night, people are out there walking their dogs, but I go out there and I see people playing catch with their dogs and their kids and all sorts of just completely kind of unstructured, informal play, people just hanging out. And I've seen protests out there as well. It's a real public space. The darker green stuff we're calling park/natural. Some of it, this is like the harvest, we're calling this the Harvest Lane Green. But then there's also green that is connected with wetlands on the edges. We think there's a pretty good amount of it. Some of it will make the landowners a little bit, well, they'll complain about it. But for instance, Bur Oak here, there's things about that. But then the thing that I actually prompted this, looking at this inside the streets and blocks, there's always a good mantra or rule of thumb is that within a couple of blocks, and maybe you stretch that to 3 blocks, of a couple of blocks walk, there's some kind of an open space. So you have the streets, which are somewhat constrained areas, but every couple of blocks, maybe every 3rd block, there's a place where there's a square or a green. And they can be small, although that's not small. That's maybe too small. But that's something that for me is an open conversation that I want to bring up to you all. And I think, looking at this, we have some room for improvement and are looking to. And I would say these small greens or squares, up to a certain size, they're actually good for development. If you've got a little green and you have a business, it may be the world's best spot for a coffee shop. or it may be the best spot. I've had builders tell me that when they're building the apartments or the units that are on these little green spaces, it's not that they get more money for them, but they sell first. So, up to a certain size, it's not so much, I think we're giving value as much as we're taking land. So anyway. Chapin,
I agree.
please.
I agree with all that, and I do want to come back to the regulating plan details, but not right now. If we could go ahead to page 22, which is in the building form standards, the initial part of it.
Yes.
There's diagrams on the left, and one of them is showing the attic story, which I think is great. But it also shows minimum and maximum pitches. And I wondered where you came out on the discussion about pitched roofs.
Well, we haven't. That's you'll see a lot of pink when you get to
Okay.
the architectural standards.
Okay.
And that's
I thought here on page 22, where there's a space in the upper left, might be a good place to show a picture of a mansard roof to talk about how that is, as it talks about later, how that fits in as space that can be residential.
We can add that. Now, one thing I want you to notice, Chapin, included mansard roofs are specifically listed and described. But whereas when the attic story, the idea is, and this is a good time to introduce that to the Planning Commission. The idea is it's developable space, but in terms of the scale of a building, it's somewhat, and I say this, I'm self-aware when I say this, it's somewhat hidden. It doesn't pump up the scale of the building a full story. If you're standing on the street, there's a limit to the pitch. So what you'll see will not be so much the roof when you're on the street within a couple of blocks, but you'll see the dormers. And the windows on the street are limited to dormers for that attic story. So when we say a 4-story building, that is 4 stories plus people who could live in the roof. And that may work out to being a half a story or 3/4 of a story. It's giving, it's keeping the scale of the buildings down, but also allowing for more program, more housing options. And the way this code is written, a mansard roof would not count as an attic story, but you can certainly do it. And that's based on and I think that the Planning Commission can discuss this, but that's based on the idea that an attic story is somewhat much less visible. A mansard roof is not to that level because the roof isn't falling back as much. It's somewhat more like an upper story that is clothed like a roof. So this draft treats the two differently.
Okay, and I didn't realize that. Thank you for pointing that out.
But they certainly are a thing in Vermont, in New England.
Good. And there's a whole lot of good stuff. I really like the way the architecture standards put so much into so little. On page 67 in the public realm standards, that's section 5.5 street specifications. I just wanted to say that everything on this page, including what's in the gray box of the principles, is wonderfully said.
I wish I could take credit for all of it.
I think you hit the nail on the head on everything. Now, the different street widths and how wide the things are, we may have some more discussion, but I think the way you've laid it out is really good. And so then parking, section 6, starting on page 75.
Yes.
This is a place I feel like I missed the mark in that there's no discussion of solar canopies. And in particular, when you come to section H here, surface parking lot planting, it sounds like it says for any surface parking lot not separated from the street, the space required building lane, blah, blah, shall be planted with canopy shade trees. that's in conflict with having solar canopies. And I just feel like we need to integrate solar canopies in with this whole section.
Yeah, yes, although I'd say, no, it's not in conflict, and yes, we can do that. It's not in conflict because the trees are pushed to the edge. They're at that street wall, so it's the periphery. So when you walk down the street, you're getting the
Okay.
wall and trees coming over. Behind it, we can talk about, now, are you interested in requiring canopies or just encouraging them?
Somewhere that's shaded from the sun, it wouldn't make sense to require it, but I just feel like they should be the expectation where feasible.
Can I add a couple points on this really briefly? One, Chapin, when you look at the building form standards,
Yes.
for each one of the forms, you'll see in the diagrams that the structure itself typically can only go as deep as 70, 80, 90 feet.
Yes.
So that kind of that rear part of the, or at least the maximum height, and beyond that 70, 80, 90 feet, whatever we choose, we're really talking about one story only there.
Yes.
And so I think one story on the, on those two lots, they're both one story in the rear. I'm hoping that that's enough to provide some ability to put panels back there on a canopy or on the structure or whatever. In terms of solar canopies themselves, from my perspective, typically going to be net metered, typically going to be exempt from local zoning. Certainly this code doesn't prohibit them in any way. We can look at that in more detail as we go. But I don't see too much of a conflict myself, but I hear what you're saying.
And I probably shouldn't emphasize the conflict. What I want to do is, we were talking about, does the whole place look like it has pitched roofs? To me, I would like the whole place to look like it was solar aware, and having any parking that's not covered, to me, is missing an opportunity. And so I would like it to be part of the form, that it part of the view, just the way we say you have to have trees, we should say you have to have canopies over your parking if it's appropriate. So it's aesthetic as well as functional. I don't want to just provide the opportunity. I want it to be part of the code.
Okay, I hear you. Interesting thought. We can certainly talk about it when we get to parking or when we get to form. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. And I think that's all I needed to say.
Okay, quick thing that I think is significant, looking at the regulating plan, I kind of drew a red line. The Taft Corners district is not exactly equal to the targeted growth area. So what we're talking about is drawing the line here so that all of this lovely, I'm being a little sarcastic, but it has its use, the kind of Walmart, Home Depot area, there is a space in the future for those kinds of really auto-oriented, big scale things, close to the freeway. So in terms of traffic, it's really captured quickly, very visually really shielded from the rest of Taft Corners, and actually, interestingly, pretty much shielded from the freeway. But so the code you're reading will apply north of this line. What happens down here with the big box will be using your existing tools and your existing system.
Thank you for reminding us, because I remember that was supposed to be exempted and I forgot. So again, I just want to say, I think this is going to work. I really love everything that I didn't say anything negative about.
Well, thank you. We love positive reinforcement, but there's just a lot to talk about. I mean, when I see Jill, I'm reminded of a comment you made and others have made it about trying to get more into the details and preserve, be specific, have things about programming in some of the greens. I remember in one of the meetings you talked about that, and a little bit, you know, an example of this is kind of that viewing station that we're showing. I think we can't fully program the greens because it's just too many and too big a scale. To some degree, that will happen. It's a little bit like Chinese boxes or Russian nesting dolls. Each one you open, and there's going to be a time when those get developed, and it will be another a planning process where people will get together and talk about what they want to see there. However, there are things we can do, I think, like this. I know the chair has talked about a particular view area that's sort of up here. You know, we're showing a fountain or some kind of monument in the green. And here it's an urban design thing partly, that you would see it down the street. So just a simple statement. I don't want to forget about those kinds of things.
Hey, Jill, Kate, and I'm not sure who's on the phone, maybe Shayla.
It's
Do you have
Shayla.
questions?
Hi, Megan.
Oh, hi, Shayla. Okay, great. Questions from you folks or comments?
It's gonna take me a while to be able to have intelligent questions, I think.
Yeah, understandable. Well, and we have many weeks to dive into the details, so plenty of time to do that. But if there are other big picture questions or
I'll reiterate
reactions.
again to, oh, sorry, go ahead.
One question I have is livestock.
Oh, I'm sorry,
control.
Ron. I apologize, Ron. I missed you. Go ahead.
It's livestock control, specifically dogs. Is there a way through this we can control the amount of, if I have a business, commercial business, and it's called an apartment, and I have 30 units, and is there a way I can, through this, set the limit of animals, or how much space is going to be required for those animals?
Ordinance, do that by ordinance. Don't do that via zoning. That Vermont
Okay.
zoning statute is very focused on built form, on development. Regulating
hear
animals,
that.
Ordinance.
I hear that, but the reality is like the person who's living at the end of Harvard Green is the person who's having to go out on Harvard Green, the ones who care, to pick up the poop, as opposed to the person who's renting the space and allowing animals to come in without some type of control, because the city can't afford to pick up the poop. This seems like an opportunity to structure the size or the numbers or various ways of control. I hear what you're saying, it's ordinance, but that's failing, I guess, would be my observation. So this is just an opportunity, and it's just my commercial break, my public service announcement to not forget about how we manage this in the town of Williston. But I hear that ordinances are the way, but that's not solving the problem today.
I would, Ron, a word of, although I agree with Taylor, but kind of a word of support for, I understand that as an issue. I live in, close in Washington, DC. I'm not a politician. And it is a space that, this is a neighborhood of townhouses and apartments. So, some people have little backyards, and a lot of people have no backyards, and it seems like everybody has a dog. So it's imperfectly managed, but it is a problem. If I get up at 6 a.m., which I never do, or 7, I don't do that, but when I do, I can look out the front window and I see people not quite in their bathrobes, but walking their dogs. And 95% of them have plastic bags, special plastic bags and little devices on their belts. So, Yeah, it's an issue, and it will be one that, as the place grows, you'll want to manage. And I occasionally, it happens, some small percentage, they don't pick up after their dogs. So it's an issue, but I don't think the zoning is a place to handle it, but it's an issue I've stepped in myself.
Okay, thank
Me
you.
too.
So my apologies again, Ron, your name was off my little box of
Oh,
people.
No worries.
Okay, so back to Jill, Kate, Shayla, if you have any more comments, reactions or thoughts? Nothing now.
I don't.
Details around, kind of like piggybacking off Ron's concerns about dog poop, that when you have density and people walking and biking, that, how does it start managing recycle containers and trash containers? And do we want those to be solar powered, to Chapin's point? And how do we know how to put those, as we don't understand what the development will be in advance, but where do you put those in relation to these green spaces? Because that's where dogs will be pooping and that sort of thing.
Is Matt gone? Has Matt left yet?
He has.
I'm going to create more work for him. Emily, maybe some earmuffs. These are great points, and I didn't try to belittle Ron's comment either, because I hear what he's saying. You guys need a public works commission. I think a lot of, Jill's comment and Ron's comment, that gets into operations and maintenance and how to maintain our public spaces. And, I think with implementing this code and additional development task corners, Williston may really want to seriously consider having a public works commission that works specifically on issues like this.
So you wouldn't, when you have some of these bump outs, I'm familiar seeing, facades like this, that right in front of the business, it's like the CVS, there is a trash and recycling, but that's not something that I've seen talked about here. So that isn't a part of the form-based code. That is totally separate.
Not coded now, but I will defer to Jeff on Jeff. Have you seen, that level of specificity in public?
I would think of that something that would be in the management realm, and that the public works would figure that out. I've in cities where I've seen that, including my own, but it's a very common, yes, both the city, trash bins and recycling bins, and also some I've seen. And in the area I live in, it's 3 and 4 story, so it's not a hyper dense, lower Manhattan, mid Manhattan or anything. But I've even seen some compactors. But what is really consistent in cities that I've lived in and I have friends in when I visited, is the city does a good job of pickup. So there's like where we are, once a week they pick up recycling, twice a week they pick up regular garbage. And you don't have to do much, you don't have to separate it. That's a big help. But I'm thinking that is on the management side of the city. But I would make a point. You all are going to see, eventually, when all the really nice drawings, the renderings, when things get more towards built out, you will have enough critical mass, and the tax base of Williston will be much stronger. I think I'm scaring Taylor. Where this will make a lot of sense. So for every foot of town sidewalk, instead of having, I guess for every 50 or 70 feet, instead of having one house, you'll have, maybe 3 stories. So you'll have 4 or 5 houses. So it's much more intense, and that becomes much easier to service. So, you have bins, trash pickup, et cetera. You're not laying pipes for miles to service 100 people. It's yards. So the intensity does help with the service, but you will all live through, the growing pains of between now and then.
Right, I do want to comment on the trash thing. So our bylaw, chapter 16, does have some limited standards around litter maintenance. With Finney Crossing, in their more recent approvals, we've looked at it, it's like, okay, you need to show us your plan for where trash receptacles will be provided in a development, but at the end of the day, it's a private trash can. It's collected by that business owner, so, or that property management firm. So some are good actors in town and do a good job with emptying those facilities. Other people, as Ron knows, leave couches next to them for weeks and weeks on end. So what happens is, and I think looking back on the friction point memo that was brought up in the past, there are other aspects that the select board will need to consider. Does there need to be a public works committee? Does there need to be looking at trash and solid waste collection more comprehensively, not only in the growth center, but townwide? I don't think there are public trash and recycling receptacles along Route 2. There's some by the library or the school, but then those are collected by, library staff, school staff, a private business. And I think Ron's point about the dog waste as well, you're thinking about, does the town need to have its plan for comprehensive solid waste collection along its public streets?
Jill, go ahead.
Just something else, and I don't know, again, if it fits in this, but something I'm always conscious of is, especially as you start getting green spaces and public spaces, or even just, walls that people can sit on or be on, is there any way to make sure that we don't take on like anti-homelessness sort of tactics with benches and spikes and those kinds of things that you see happening all over communities? I think if there's a way to like code that in so that we prevent it, so that, not that we're welcoming, et cetera, but that we're not sort of pressing that community further.
I'll say seemingly contradictory things. I don't think so, but I'm sure friendly to that. I hate those things. I also,
it becomes annoying to sit on benches sometimes, the way that they will, put things in between and divide them.
no, and if you've got to sleep outside, I don't know, it just seems mean spirited, besides annoying to everybody else.
Yeah, Jill, I know that I didn't read those public realm centers with that kind of critical eye. So let's make extra sure when we read that section 5 that we're making those spaces friendly.
Yeah.
And very hostile architecture, anti-homeless architecture is often not disability friendly, not child friendly as well.
If we can put it in there, well, I'm sure happy to slip it in.
And just overall, I'm glad you raised this question, because overall, I think, any place that is investing in the public realm needs just so much more seating than is present already. And particularly with our aging population, as we have in Vermont. And if we're, part of being a walkable place is also having places to rest. And so I love that you mentioned that. And I'm also very opposed to hostile architecture myself. So thanks.
Yes, those spaces, I proposed to my wife on one of those benches. It didn't have the separations. I might be single if they'd been there. Yeah, and those are so, that's going to be another level. I don't think we can code those, but being careful, the design of some of these greens, a low wall makes this, a continuous bench that's just simple things.
Chapin, go ahead.
Oh,
you're muted.
Thank you. I wanted to add on 2 of these points. And Jeff just said part of what I wanted to say, which is low walls are really good. And, there's in this form-based code, there's a requirement for street walls if you're not building to the full extent of what's required of your building facade. And I wonder if the code should allow for the opportunity of this kind of low wall seating. And on the trash, I think to the various cities that I've been in, not just the United States, but other countries as well. And I believe when you have that density and that number of people who are not residents who are using the space, that it really is so haphazard to require every individual business owner or person to manage that, that I feel that it should be a municipal thing. And if it's a municipal thing, then you want to allow space for the pads for municipal size trash, recycling, et cetera, bins on most street corners. And so, where our street corner intersections have the bump outs for the pedestrian crossings, that there ought to be just an automatic space where trash receptacles that are serviced daily or every other day by the town could be placed, even if not initially, but in the long run. Just an opinion. And by the way you handled street rooftop parties in the code is perfect.
Oh. Thank you, thank you. We'll see if others agree.
Hey, other questions or thoughts for Jeff? Right. Well, I'm looking forward to diving in, and we will see the order of our more detailed discussions is that the next one up is building form standards. So that's at our November 2nd meeting.
We flip-flopped it on you, Megan, sorry.
Oh,
We didn't let you know. We flip-flopped it and we're gonna do architectural first and then do building form
Okay.
second.
yeah, actually, I think that's probably a good idea. Okay, so our agenda is wrong. And we'll do architectural standards at our next meeting. So is it pretty clear what we should be reading?
Section 4 is your architectural standards.
Okay,
It certainly wouldn't hurt to read section 3 and section 4 at the same time because they fit together. But certainly our focus next meeting will be on section 4 architectural standards.
Yeah, I think I would suggest read 4 first, because there'll be some things then will make you wonder, and then go to 3.
okay.
To that end, do you recommend us holding off reading it so we're not getting confused or, trying to take in too much? Or do you really, or do you recommend, like Chapin did, kind of doing a big overview and then, how to digest it?
I'd say go for it. Tailor, not Newton, but tailor your approach to what you want to do. I think Chapin couldn't help himself, and I'd do the same. Yeah.
I would say don't read it all in one go. It's a lot. As someone who codes a lot, I read it all at the same time in order, because my brain has been trained to like understand that kind of sequence of coding. For people that don't code, I don't know what will work for you. Try to read it through. But if that doesn't work, maybe just pick out a section or two that you think is most important to you. And then if you want to have a conversation, like I said, with either Matt or Emily and staff or myself or Jeff before next meeting, just to kind of ask questions that maybe kind of basic, you think, just to provide you a better understanding of what we're trying to code. We're more than happy to answer those questions in advance of the meeting.
Yeah. Other than the intro, the order 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is not important. Read the intro and then architecture and then whatever.
Right.
I have 2 questions.
Go ahead, Chapin.
If we have an opinion about the things that are in pink, should we bring it with us to the next meeting? Is the first question.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's kind of trumps everything else to try to get those resolved if we can easily do so. And the second is things on the regulating plan. Does that scheduled to come up, or when do you want comments on that?
Yeah, I think we'll sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Oh, I was just going to point out that that's the last of the scheduled meetings is about
you.
the regulating plan itself. Unless Taylor moved it to some other meeting.
No, I didn't move that one. But we will simultaneously review section 2 regulating plan with the map itself.
Yeah.
And I imagine 90% of that conversation will probably be about the map.
95. And we're gonna, it's gonna come up in the other sessions as well.
And I think we may have another piece that's not your responsibility, Jeff and Taylor, but our official map goes hand in hand with that regulating plan. And I think we need some draft of it at the same time that we talk about this.
Yeah, that was one of my questions, was sort of the relationship and sequencing of the official map and the regulating plan, because those are, probably related.
Emily's in the room, but I'll take a shot at answering this first. As I think Matt was thinking that the official map would be a part of the same bylaw amendment that the form-based code was. So they would kind of be adopted in tandem as a part of the bylaw. Oh, Matt's back. All right, Matt, you go ahead and answer.
Yes, I think it will be timely to do it that way. If anything, if we have complications, we would do the portion of the official map that is inside the growth center at the same time as the base code. They really complement one another a great deal in terms of getting the street arrangement built the way you want it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but we want you guys to mark up these sections as much as you want, highlight, take notes, post-it notes. The plan is, once we get that feedback, we'll give, as we complete a section, we'll make the revisions and then put copies of the revision for you and we'll move on to the next section and you'll get a copy of the one that we just finished. So each meeting, we'll look at a section, comment. Next meeting, you'll get the revised one. Did we get everything did we catch everything? Talk about the revised one, and this binder will keep getting updated. We'll put those new copies out there in the box for you.
Go ahead, Chapin.
I just want to make a huge thank you for preparing these materials. I don't know whether that was all our staff or whatever, but it's everybody. I just getting them in this form where you can put your hands on it and write in the margins and having the insert with the large map and so forth. This was fantastic. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I stopped by the office yesterday to see if they were ready yet. And Emily was in the midst of printing the big maps. So I had to wait till today. But
yeah, it's fun putting together. Most of the times I just make a PDF and upload it online. I'm like, I guess I did a thing.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on form-based code before we turn to our next agenda item? We also have minutes to do.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Jeff. That was very concise and very helpful. Okay, so.
Thank you, Taylor, too.
Yeah, Taylor, absolutely.
Yeah, Jeff wrote the code. You don't, no need to thank me at this point.
Okay, so can we move to the minutes then? And I had made a couple of changes. I don't know if anybody went in. I did my changes maybe about 5:30 today, so not sure if anybody had a look after that.
I went in earlier and I can't remember what I did like a week ago, and I can't remember what I did.
Okay, I didn't see your changes maybe, but maybe they were already incorporated. Okay. Let's see. Did anybody have any comments or questions about the minutes or corrections? I had highlighted a few things. There was a sentence fragment there that you have your mouse on. And I wasn't sure what, yeah, okay, it was innovative, all right. Yeah, so those changes that you're fixing right now, I think that's Emily. Is that right? Planning and zoning, whoever that is. Those are the changes that I had made, but otherwise, I mean, they were really just clarifications and small edits. So if everybody's okay with them, I would have entertain a motion to approve the minutes. Not
Hi,
all at
Megan and
once.
Shayla. I move to approve the minutes.
As amended. Okay, thank you, Shayla. Second. I saw Chapin's hand first. Thank you also, Alex. Okay, all in favor of approving the minutes as amended. Okay, Kate is going to abstain because she wasn't at the meeting. Okay, thank you, Kate. And then, so let's go back to our vote. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended, raise your real or digital hand. And Chapin, okay.
Aye.
All right, great. And Shayla, I'm assuming that since you voted, that you moved, that you voted in favor.
Aye.
Okay, great. Okay, so minutes have been approved, and that leaves us with form-based code interim bylaws update.
Yeah.
Matt, is that you going to
That's
lead that?
me.
Okay.
So I did prepare for the commission a brief memorandum reminder that at your last meeting, the commission voted to ask the select board to consider interim bylaws in the Taft Corners form-based code area, essentially to stop or limit development that might happen between now and when the form-based code is adopted. At that meeting, I said I would talk to the town manager and possibly council to try to feel that idea out a little bit and make sure there were any questions the select board might have could be answered prior to going and speaking with the select board on the matter. And I did end up having a conversation with town council on this. And so the bulk of my memo is that town council has identified this gap in statute where we are not, in their opinion, well positioned to adopt interim bylaws. And his reasoning has to do with the language I bolded in the inset quote that says, if you are conducting or have taken action to conduct studies or have held or are holding a hearing. And so we did conduct studies. They're done. That was the vision process. We have not yet held a hearing. So, the sort of admonishment I got from council on this was, interim bylaws can be really controversial. They can generate lawsuits. This particular attorney has worked in the past for South Burlington, which is about to come out of its third year of interim bylaws, and probably, had that experience of what that can be like. And so, wanting to be airtight, if the commission wanted to get this recommendation to the select board, the recommendation was, well, you did your studies, they're all done, warn a hearing. Essentially warn a hearing on the form-based code, just like you would when you were going to adopt it. And that if that hearing had been warned and held and continued, you're then in process in the eyes of statute, and at that point the select board would be in a position to consider, and if they chose, adopt interim bylaws. So the other questions I attempted to answer in my back and forth with council was, what would that interim bylaw look like? One way is to adopt whatever the draft is of the form-based code and say development that conforms to this may proceed, development that does not either may not proceed or may only proceed under conditional use review by the select board. Or you could have something a little more restrictive that just says we're really sort of having a moratorium. So that said, the procedural step that the Planning Commission could consider would be to warn a public hearing on the form-based code. You have all but one chapter of it here. And obviously, there's a bunch of it that says it might be this way or it might be that way, which makes it a little more challenging to administer in its current form. And I think the question for the Planning Commission a little bit, and I think this is a good time to ask it now that you have the binders in hand and you've had the consultant walk you through it, is what does the time gap feel like in terms of where the commission is now and when the commission might have something that was being transmitted to the select board? So in other words, we have quite a bit of work in front of us the next few meetings. Does the commission want to sort of set a little bit of that aside or some time aside and go through the hearing warning process and the conversation with the select board? Does the commission just want to focus on getting through it and getting it done? We certainly as staff are able to do either or both in whatever way you'd like.
Okay, this is super helpful. Thank you for all your work on that. I wonder if it sounds like one question is, if we were going to be done with form-based code fairly soon, say in, I don't know, the next 4 months or something like that, is it perhaps better just to try to focus all our energy and time on that and kind of let the chips fall in terms of the development side of things? Maybe you could just refresh our memories on how the development process might move forward with us working on form-based code, and when I remember in our last meeting, for instance, you clarified something about that the code people are held to is based on when they submitted X, but I don't remember the details of that. Maybe you could kind of refresh our memories, Matt.
Yeah, sure. So, really briefly, there are 2 main stages of review in front of the Development Review Board for all projects. There's a pre-application review and a discretionary permit review. Pre-application is what most communities would call sketch plan or concept review. And applicants do not vest in the version of the bylaws that exists at the time that they submit that preliminary application.
Mm-hmm.
It's typically a preliminary review. We pretty much know what the bylaws say. We're able to give good feedback, but there's no reliance on that version of the bylaws. When applicants file a complete application for the next stage of review called discretionary permit, they are then vested in the version of the bylaws that exists at that time. And so, we have, you can kind of pick through the last few months of the Development Review Board agenda. We do have a couple of projects in the Growth Center area that have gone through pre-application review, but have yet to go through discretionary permit review. In other words, they're not currently vested in today's bylaws, but they could become so should they proceed through their process and file that next level of review. One of those projects is the Essex Alliance Church residential development by Snyder. That project, because it's residential, has an additional step called growth management that takes place in March. And it cannot file its discretionary permit until it's been through that growth management step. And furthermore, what they'll be in a position to do once they get through growth management is to file a discretionary permit for a phase of the development that aligns with the amount of residential allocation they receive at growth management, which will be a partial number of those 300-ish dwelling units that they're looking to build. In other words, subsequent phases of that project will file subsequent discretionary permits and will mostly be subject to versions of the bylaws that exist at the time that that happens. Our other major project, we have a commercial project, the supermarket on Wright Avenue across from the CVS. That's been filed as a pre-application and is sort of slowly working its way through that preliminary review. Might not be in a position to file a discretionary permit until around the time of the new year, when everything is said and done. Correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, we have two buildings in Finney Crossing that have been through preliminary review. And
Right, we have the discretionary permit review for building H in the urban park and the senior living building.
right, so there's two of the last sort of three things that might happen in Finney that have been through preliminary but have not been through discretionary permit yet. And neither of those has to go through growth management, so they might move a little bit faster. So life goes on. Stuff is always kind of coming in the door, and it comes in based on those rules. It comes in on one version of the rules or another. But we would anticipate that to kind of continue, and when the rules change, they change.
Okay, that's really helpful. Other questions that folks might have, or perhaps reactions to the choices before us? Chapin, go ahead.
First, I was really disappointed in the council opinion, in the legal opinion, but I don't want to argue with the council opinion. To me, the vision, we explicitly said we have a lot of friction points and we don't quite agree with it. We're going to work it out during the coding of the form-based code. So to say that we have finished the study, and to me, it's very much a work in progress that's spilled over into the coding phase. And so I don't agree with the premise, but I don't want to argue. And I feel like if we're going to take legal advice, and I think we should, then we should just work as fast as we can and make sure to hold public hearings before March 1st. And go ahead and put something forward as form-based code that we may think needs more work. This reminds me of the energy plan conversation some, but getting something there at least replaces the old code with something that's better, and then do a revision, say 6 months into it. So I don't think our work will be done by March, frankly, but I think we ought to hold hearings in January, February, so that something's in place by March. Actually, do we need more lead time than that for the select board to hold their hearings?
Yeah, if you wanted the select board holding hearings in March, you'd probably need to be transmitting to them toward the end of January. It may be fairly tight. I would say that, based on council's advice, the opportunity to warn a hearing on sort of whatever you have, what council said to me was they can warn the hearing, open it, and continue it most likely to a date uncertain, knowing that they're going to need to warn it again when they really want to see it go to the select board. So, there's some legwork involved in warning and holding that hearing. But in council's opinion, that would put the planning commission in the position to go to the select board with a legitimate request around interim bylaws.
Other thoughts or questions?
Is there a way to open this as a hearing and then do our next couple meetings as public hearings?
Well, in fact, what you could do is, you could take this document you have in front of you now and warn a hearing on it, which you would just open and immediately close, essentially, and then just go back into a work session mode. it's that you've undergone all of that noticing that council thinks would be important.
So
How
we
long's
could
the
open.
warning period? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So if we were to do that, say right away, right, is this like, you know, a 2-week warning just to our next meeting, or is this like something where we can't meet on it for 6 weeks and then council can't meet? Like, what's the timeline?
You can meet on it and work on it. You just, you know, there would be a draft that would be understood as the hearing draft. But it would be out in the world that the town of Williston is seriously considering making these changes to its bylaws. So it's a little bit, I guess I'd say, kind of a pro forma thing, where you're going through the motions of warning the hearing, because then you know you're safe in statute. And if that was the first question the select board had in some future conversation about, you know, at the end of the day, the select board's in the driver's seat about interim bylaws. So if their first question is, does council think we're in a good position to do this? And council's answer is no, because there's been no hearing warned. Well, then, you know, what our attorney said to me was, you know, have them warn a hearing. It doesn't obligate you to hold a series of hearings. It doesn't obligate you to work on the code in hearing mode. It obligates you to open a hearing, say, we've opened this hearing, we've told everybody we're working on this. Now we're gonna close it, continuing to a date uncertain in the future, and we're just gonna go back to work.
I think that's a great idea to do that, because it also sort of puts developers on notice a little bit more publicly, right? It's like, hey, the town is thinking about doing this. It might shake other developers who want to get their things in ahead of time to do so. So we'll get a better picture of anybody who's been like sort of right about there, and oh my gosh, we ought to get this in before they freeze it or whatever. And if we can move this process fast enough, we can get ahead of all these developments. So I'm all for warning it and making the process start, even if we don't end up recommending it to the town council. It's sort of good that we said we were thinking about it, isn't it?
So Alex, you're suggesting that we warn a hearing to sort of publicize the fact that we are working on form-based code, but we may or may not then request interim zoning from the
But warn a
select board?
hearing that we're thinking about interim zoning, which is what Matt's saying, right? Just warn it, like, so that they know we're thinking about basically, you know, freezing, if you will, the zoning. It's probably not the word we want. But so I would
So I
warn
think-
on interim zoning, and then that way we can have the hearing and we can sort of move it forward to the select board and all of that.
Maybe I'm misunderstanding, but my read of this document was that we would be warning a hearing that we are reviewing form-based code, not that we're entertaining interim zoning. Is that so? Which is the story, Matt?
Yeah, that's correct, the way Megan said it. So you're considering a change to the bylaws. That's the thing you warn is, you know, the goal is to get this whole form-based code adopted. And then it's the decision about interim is all about the select board. In this case, the only decision about interim at the planning commission level is, does the planning commission want to ask the select board to consider taking it up? So you go and warn the hearing, and then you write a memo to the select board and you say, we warned a hearing because we were told that's what needed to happen for you to even entertain the idea of interim. Now we'd like to have a conversation with you about interim. So it's a bit of a placeholder. And so where you were starting to go, Alex, when I thought you were talking about the permanent bylaws, is still a valid point, which is you are, in a broader way than we have thus far, putting the community on notice that, hey, the town of Williston is considering some pretty major changes to how it does land use in the growth center. So it's, more notice is always better in the public servants world, right?
Yeah, I think I get it better now. And yeah, unintended consequence, but it actually makes a lot of sense. So, I still support it now that I understand what I said.
Okay. So, so basically warning a public hearing about form-based code would protect us and allow us the opportunity to suggest to the select board that they implement interim bylaws, sorry. If we warned a hearing, however, that doesn't commit us to moving forward with a recommendation to the select board, is that correct?
It does not. It
Is not correct?
It does not commit you to.
Okay.
Select board. It just puts you in a better position to support that request if you want to make it. And the only thing warning the hearing commits you to doing is making sure you open up that hearing and continue it at the time that you've warned it for.
Okay, so, and it's what, a 2-week lead time to warn the hearing, or is it more than that?
15 days inclusive of the day it goes in the paper.
Okay,
Or of the day that you send it out. So it would still be, probably be a hearing for the meeting after next.
right. Yeah,
For the
November 16th.
You
Yeah,
have to send something in the paper by the 29th to have it in on the 4th in advance.
yep,
I know. 15 days would be
Okay,
paper 28th. It have to be the 22nd.
yeah, okay. So yeah, we would figure that out.
okay.
I think the important thing. Oh, go ahead, Megan, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, it seems like if we decide to warn a hearing, it doesn't commit us necessarily in 2 or 3 weeks, or I guess November 16th. We don't necessarily have to move forward with the suggestion to the select board, but it allows us the option. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes.
So that seems like, I realize it's work for you folks to warn a hearing. And obviously we'll just have to be very conscientious about opening it and shutting it and all those things. I'll need your help with that. But my sense is that gives us more flexibility, and that without a whole lot of cost, other than a bit of your time, which I do want to respect that. So what are people's feelings about that decision? So my proposal is basically that we ask Emily and Matt to warn a hearing, just announcing that we are reviewing form-based code. That then gives us the legal coverage to decide on November 16th if we want to request the select board to implement interim bylaws. Chapin, go ahead.
I'm not on board, and I think because it feels like maneuvering, and it also then draws attention to a work in progress, and then staff and we at public comment times may get a tirade from Jeff Davis about us trying to put grid streets in his fields. I just feel like it opens a little bit of Pandora's box of comment on our work in progress rather than us. We've already gotten public comment, and now we're trying to process it. And so to do something that stimulates more perhaps reactionary public comment to a draft that's not the final thing, to me feels like it might create more confusion and more work. And so I'm going to go with the majority of this commission if people want to do it, but I'm not there. I'm more feeling like I want to rush to get, and I want to go ahead and adopt a imperfect plan earlier rather than later, and then revise it as a different strategy to try to achieve something similar. And also because, yes, it gives us an option to have interim zoning, but that's a huge burden on the select board to have interim zoning. And so having to do this much maneuvering just to do that, I'm not sure.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I understand that perspective for sure. Other thoughts or reactions, contributions? here?
Megan, this is Shayla.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I'm sorry, Matt and Emily, that I don't understand this better, but just in terms of, or maybe Megan needs to answer it, the timeline for if we rush, is it realistic that we could warn a meeting before March?
On sort of the completed, once you've done your your run through the chapters. Yes, it's certainly possible. We have a night set aside to review essentially each of the chapters. But I think you have to kind of each look inside yourselves at what's in those chapters in terms of development standards and think about where you might be on those with your peers. I've been through enough bylaw amendments to know that you can spend nearly an infinite amount of time on them, trying to get agreement or even consensus. Even grudging consensus takes quite a bit of time sometimes. So, there's a lot to go through there. I will echo to a little bit Chapin's comment about getting to an end state that you're going to amend. I've used this metaphor a little bit recently that adopting the form-based code is kind of like buying the Lego set, and then you can build other stuff with it. It's a lot easier to go in and change the building form designation on a particular street, or go change the number of stories somewhere once the whole code is in place. So it is realistic in my mind, Shayla, to answer your question, that you could be turning this over to the select board early in 2022. And I would say that this is a lengthy and complex enough document that the select board is really going to be relying on all of you to be able to say, yes, we've been through it very carefully. We think this is what's right for the town, and here's why. Because we probably won't spend another 3 months with the select board doing it chapter by chapter. They're going to be looking to you folks for leadership on this for sure.
Okay, that's super helpful. Yeah, Alex, go ahead.
Chapin made a comment. I'm not sure I understood. Chapin, you said that it was that the interim zoning was a big burden on the select board, I believe. Can you explain that a little bit more? What makes it such a large burden on the select board?
Any application that would go before the development review board during that period goes before the select board, who has to either make a decision that might be easy, but more likely it's hard. And so they then have to implement whatever the sort of guiding principles are, like try to apply this new code that isn't yet adopted to a project. And it's a time sink for the select board.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I have to say,
I misunderstood that. I thought
Yeah.
that was coming like towards us, not to the select board.
No. Yeah, I have to say that is a major hesitation of mine about, once I learned more about interim bylaws, is I'm very concerned the select board will just say no. And because it is a lot of work for them, and if you've seen their meetings, they tend to go on and have a lot of work and they don't seem to get through everything. And so that is definitely a concern of mine. And I wouldn't be surprised at all if they just said, no, we're not going to suggest this, because it would be too much work for them. So that's definitely a risk. Jill, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the same thing. If we would open it up, like Chapin said, and I think we could shake a lot of trees, and developers could come in and yell and whatever else about things. And then we don't have a guarantee that the select board even says, we're going to do it. And I think that's ultimately what we're trying to get to. So it seems a little bit risky.
Yeah, great points everyone's making here. This is such a great example of thoughtful deliberation, right? Like why we consider all the angles. Any other comments?
I'm curious what staff would recommend that we do.
Yeah. Or if they don't want to get their hands dirty with this.
No, although I do think, given the controversial nature of interim bylaws, it's really important that it not be a staff-driven decision. We're here to administer what the Planning Commission wants to do. That said, this has been a long process, it's taken on an awful lot, both in terms of talking about, a future for Taft Corners that goes out, 50 plus years, talking about all aspects of development in a new and innovative way. This group's really worked hard and struggled hard to go through all of that. And, sometimes I leave a meeting when we've worked on form-based code just feeling really, really great about the whole project. Like we're so close, and the group is really developing a consensus. And sometimes I leave a meeting thinking like, I don't know, are we ever going to, have this in a product that folks agree on enough to move forward? And it kind of doesn't matter in terms of the form-based code or in terms of the interim bylaws question, because interim is only good for so long. It's entirely a select board decision. They would be assigning themselves fundamentally more work, not to mention during the season that leads from budget season into town meeting.
It's
and
the
that's
holiday. I feel like
and
that's
holidays and everything else. So that's a challenge. And I'll just say this. I just brought cannabis superfund wetlands parking and cleanup to the select board from your September 7th hearing. And I talked to the select board for about 20 minutes about this stuff. They wanted to add something on here about some impact fee relief for affordable housing. And then we were done and they said, great, go add that one thing and let's have a hearing on this. That comes from their really deep trust in the planning commission they've appointed to get this work done. And I would, when I'm feeling my best about this project, I'm feeling like, yeah, the end of February, beginning of March, the commission's going to be ready to move this to the select board for consideration. With, I think, as Chapin's described, a commitment to set some time aside to go in and tweak it as needed. And I'd love to see that happen and be focused on that.
Okay.
It does
Thank
mean
you.
something might get built under the current bylaw between now and then. So it goes. Our current development standards aren't the worst in the world. They're just not effectively achieving everything the town's really set out to achieve in Taft Corners. So it goes.
Okay, great. So my sense is that we've moved away from considering warning the hearing and moving toward a recommendation to the select board on interim bylaws. Do we want to do kind of an informal poll just to see where people are feeling? So, because we are after our time period too. Okay, a thumbs down from Alex. Chapin, you've already said that you are not on board. Jill, your thoughts?
I mean, only if I could guarantee that they were going to go for it and they'd take on the extra work. So I guess no.
Okay. Kate, what are your thoughts?
Did it? Sorry, my stupid arrow is gone from the computer, so I have to
Oh no.
drag my finger until something lights up that I can push. I'm in agreement with Chapin. I don't think so.
Okay. Shayla, thoughts?
I'll begrudgingly go with everybody else.
Okay. All right. Well, we owe you one, I guess. Okay, so I'm going to just say we're done talking about that. We had an informal vote about interim bylaws before, but that we now that we have more information, I think we can forego that previous recommendation. And is there anything else that we need to do on that, Matt?
Not on that item, no.
Okay.
We've all learned a lot about it. File
Yep.
that away.
Worthwhile.
Use it again sometime.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, final comment, Chapin?
I just wanted to say, in a sense, we're just giving ourselves more work because we're pushing ourselves to get to the point of having something we can warn that's the real thing sooner. But I'm not sure that that's a bad thing, because this writing something as complex as this has a high chance of running a long time. We've hired a good consultant. We have excellent staff. We are a good commission. If we put in a few hours each 2-week period, I think we can get through it. And I realize we've just put more pressure on us to do it, but let's go it. Let's do it. We're a good group.
Okay, thank you for that. And it is our purview, right? I mean, this is what we signed up for. So if we have a mass defection next May, well, just keep that in mind.
I will say, when I opened it this afternoon, I thought, oh my God, what am I doing?
Yeah, but that's why we have many, many meetings to go through the details. So, okay, great. Well, thank you all for that very thoughtful deliberation and for really considering those issues from all angles. I am happy to entertain a motion to adjourn. Anyone? Jill, thank you. All right, so I'm going to call it. We are adjourned. I appreciate all your work. Thank you very much, Matt and Emily, and hello, Melinda. And thank you for your help as well. Have a great week, everybody.
All right. Good night.
Thank you, everyone.
Good night.
Thanks.
Good night.
Bye.